Order, order. Can I invite Greg Hands to move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Davies. I beg to move that this House has considered the future of free schools and academies in England, and is delighted to have secured this debate and a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Davies. Can I start off by making a tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Surrey Heath, and his perseverance, Mr. Davies, in bringing forward the legislation in 2010, which under the Academies Act revolutionised the way schools operate. And also, in particular, to my right honourable friend, the member for Bognor Regis, who, that veritable rock of stability in government, who has been the person making it happen almost right the way throughout. Mr. Davies' naysayers said it wouldn't work. They called it an experiment, accused us of creating divide in the state school system. 8 years on, we now see they were wrong. Since the first free schools in new academies opened in 2011, our schools are performing better than ever. Whereas only 68% of state-funded schools were good or outstanding in 2010, this jumped to 89% at the end of August 2017. And nowhere, Mr. Davies, is more exemplary of the benefits that free schools and academies bring to the system than the two boroughs in my constituency, Kensington and Chelsea, and Hammersmith and Fulham. Indeed, K&C and H&F under the Conservatives until 2014 have been the vibrant nucleus of schools reform since 2010. In these two boroughs, actually the smallest two boroughs in the whole of London, there have been an astonishing 5 new secondary schools opened since 2010, and every one of them has been a free school or an academy. The Kensington Aldridge Academy, the Chelsea Academy, the Hammersmith Academy, the Fulham Boys School, and the West London Free School. And these are providing places for over 3,700 students. I attended 3 of the openings, 2 with the Secretary of State at the time. And this year's GCSE results show they are doing fantastically well, Mr. Davies. 85% of exams at West London Free School were awarded grades of 9 to 4, in old money, A star to C. Chelsea Academy's results were in the top 10% nationally, with 30% of English and Maths awarded grades equivalent to the old A star and A grades. At Kensington Aldridge Academy, right at the foot of Grenfell Tower, deeply affected by that tragedy last year, students perform a third of a grade better at A-level than those with the same GCSE results in other schools, the highest progress score in the whole of the borough. Mr. Davies, 4 of Britain's top 12 primary schools are in Kensington and Chelsea. It's a remarkable record. It really has the best schools in the country. It made even more remarkable, in my opinion, by the fact that the most affluent 50% of that borough choose to actually opt out of the state system in its entirety. Despite that, Mr. Davies, they have 4 of the best 12 performing primary schools in the country and some really excellent secondary schools as well. Throughout both boroughs, including conversions to academy status, we have no less than 30 free schools and academies. I'm delighted to be able to say that every single one of them, 100%, have received a rating of good or outstanding. This is absolute testament to the success of these schools. One of the great things about the Free Schools and Academies programme is the autonomy they receive to set pay levels, conditions and hours. It allows them to keep the best talent in our classrooms. When teachers play an indispensable role in nurturing the young minds of our children, they should feel a part of the decision-making process, because recognising teachers as experts in their fields and empowering them in that way is a vital part of retention. Fulham Boys School is an excellent example of this. I should declare, Mr. Davies, I'm the patron of the school, co-patron, I should add, a place where in the last 4 years, which is remarkable for an inner London school, the last 4 years, only 5 teachers have left, every single one of them to be promoted or because for life reasons they're moving out of London. You can find other state-funded schools that have had a turnover of 100% in the same period. Teachers see themselves spending their entire career there and in turn become long-term mentors to students. Familiar, stable figures throughout a child's education. And if I were to just quote briefly, Mr. Davies, assuming I can find the document, from... Yes, exactly. I'm grateful for the intervention.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way and for I congratulate him for securing the debate. Schools also have autonomy over policy in relation to exclusions, and in Stockton Borough, the Select Committee looked at the escalating number of exclusions across academies, and yet they have no powers whatsoever to influence what the schools do. Does the member agree with me that ministers need to look more closely at exclusions and why they're happening, and why some of our children are being denied a full education?
Greg Hands.
I always think, Mr Davies, that it's sensible to keep these policies under review at all times. I'm not familiar with the position in Stockton, but I think the honourable gentleman makes a fair point that I'm sure the Minister has noted. I was going to come on in due course to talk about the future of the programme as well. But I was going to quote, for a very helpful intervention, from the headmaster of the Fulham Boys' School, a remarkable man called Alan Ebenezer from your part of the world, Mr Davies. And he said this about taking on his position. He said he was happily in his school in Cardiff, not Swansea, but nevertheless not the right part of the world. He said, what's that? Okay, very good. And he says, and yet 8 months later, he was happy in his position. I decided to apply for a headship at a school which had no site, no pupils, no staff, no exam results, nothing in the trophy cabinet, and was 150 miles from my homeland. Why? Because the opportunity to build a school from scratch, the vision set out for that school, and the ideology of the free school movement were so alluring. It was an opportunity to make a difference, challenge society, transform young people's lives, to shake up the established order. I came to London to show what a free school could do when it properly embraces its freedom. I believe the first 4 years of Fulham Boys' School have done just that. And that is the kind of the can-do attitude that I think we're seeing in so many of these schools in my constituency. Another example of doing this well is the group of ARC schools, of which there are 5 between the 2 boroughs. They have led the way in teacher training innovations. Their Now Teach venture, set up in 2016, was designed to encourage high flyers to retrain as teachers. They get on board the lawyers, doctors and bankers of the world to inspire children and become role models in the classroom. Such innovation is only possible when schools are freed from red tape and the bureaucratic decision-making processes of local councils. Yes, of course. So, yes.
I appeared from behind him in this case. Will he also add to that list of people that they get involved, the parents? It's absolutely crucial that the parents are involved in a big way in the running of the schools, because that solves many of the problems that the teachers have with things like discipline.
I think my honourable friend hits the nail on the head, Mr Davies, that the vital role of parents in all of this. Many of these free schools are parent-led initiatives. The Fulham Boys' School, I first met with them and the Secretary of State, the then Secretary of State, the member for Surrey Heath, in I think about late 2010 or early 2011, discussing how to do that. I get groups of parents from my constituency coming to me all the time with all kind of innovative ideas. I'm going to come on to some of the problems they face, however, particularly in finding a site. But my honourable friend makes a very, very powerful point. And nationally, Mr Davies, these schools are also doing extremely well. The proportion of primary schools rated as outstanding are nearly double that of all state-funded primary schools. Secondary free schools and academies are also ahead of state-run maintained schools in the proportion rated outstanding. In total, 30% of free schools have been judged as outstanding, compared to 21% of other schools. And I see more and more demand, Mr Davies. I get groups looking for a particular specialism. I've had a group of Spanish-speaking residents of Fulham come to me to talk about setting up a Spanish and a bilingual Spanish free school. I get the same with the French community in Fulham. Also people looking at particular subject specialisms. It really has driven innovation in my constituency. However, some issues with the system I think still need ironing out. Despite all this excellent news, we must not be complacent. Within this, there should be no presumption of preferred suppliers of academy chains. I will take another intervention, yes.
I'm grateful for taking A second intervention, and we can all celebrate the success of schools in local authorities as well as academies, and it's great that the government built on the legacy left by the Blair government, which invested tremendously in education over many years. But I wonder if he shares my concerns about support for failing academies. The Regional School Commissioner in the North East is struggling to find a partner for one of our schools in the Stockton Borough, and even suggested at one stage that a failing academy chain actually take it over. Now, months later, it still doesn't have a partner, because when people look at the books, they realise that the falling roll means that there are insufficient resources to do what they need to achieve. So ministers really do need to intervene there quite heavily.
Well, I thank you for that intervention. Again, I'm not familiar with this particular local circumstance, but what I would say to the honourable gentleman is that free schools and academies, of course there will be examples of schools that will be in difficulties across all categorisations of schools. But the statistics for this are absolutely clear, that free schools and academies are significantly more likely to be succeeding than schools which are not free schools or academies. That is what the evidence shows clearly in this case. But I agree with him. Of course, any school that is facing difficulties will need careful attention from relevant local or national authorities. Of course, I'll give way.
I'm grateful for the member for Chelsea and Fulham for giving way, and he makes passionate defence of his schools and his constituency, and that's the first thing a constituency MP does. But there is no evidence anywhere that shows that academisation means schools are performing better.
Okay, well, I disagree with that, Mr. Davies. I've already read out quite a bit of evidence. The statistics behind the academies outperforming the rest of the sector. 65% of those which were inspected saw their grades improve from inadequate to either good or outstanding, having been transformed to academy. Multi-academy trusts enable our best-performing schools to help struggling schools improve all the time, Mr. Davies. I think the evidence speaks for itself in terms of the statistics I read out earlier, as well as the government's overall improvement in school standards. But I come back to my point about where I think we need to improve. One size doesn't fit all for education. Schools can't simply be transposed from one part of the country to another or rolled out in a cookie-cutter approach simply because they've worked in one format. There has to be room for local organic growth. And I put on the record my frustration with the Education and Skills Funding Agency. It must also do better at working with schools to anticipate and resolve problems in site delivery. The Fulham Boys' School, which has been waiting to move to its new site for some time now, has been particularly affected by the ESFA. And should, in this regard, harness local knowledge and relationships rather than necessarily relying on centralised procurement processes. Schools need to have certainty to plan for their futures. At this point, I would thank the Secretary of State, the current Secretary of State, for meeting me and the school last summer. And I know we've got another school coming up, trying to drive through the move to the new site in Heckfield Place in my constituency. And I again quote from the headmaster of the school. His blog is called, I think overdoes it the other way. He says, "Why the free school movement will fail," which I think is far too pessimistic. The title of his blog, and in fact doesn't really match the content. But he does say this. My view, shaped over the last 4 years, is that bureaucrats' delivery of free school policy is directly frustrating government's aspirations for it. He adds, secondly, free schools like FBS are constantly being frustrated and hampered by slow-moving bureaucracy, red tape and process. And I just add into the mix here, Mr. Davies, one of the most extraordinary meetings I think I've ever had in government when I was a minister was taking in the Fulham Boys' School to meet with some of the officials of the ESFA. Admittedly, it was an outside contractor who said to the Fulham Boys' School, which is also a Church of England school as well, said to them, you are a faith school, you must have belief that your school will open. He couldn't offer specific reassurances on the site and when the contractors doing the site would be ready. He simply said to them that as a faith school, they needed to believe, Mr. Davies. Now, I don't know how religious you are, Mr. Davies, but I would say that probably even the most evangelical people would want to see something perhaps slightly more concrete than that on the table. So progress, unfortunately, has come to a grinding halt under Labour in Hammersmith and Fulham. The borough has failed to provide additional school places that are needed, particularly for the bulge in secondary school numbers that is coming up. And the borough now, ironically, has the lowest figure, despite all these new schools, for first-choice secondary school placements in England. It is absolutely rock bottom of that league table. Hammersmith and Fulham simply doesn't have enough places in quality schools that parents want their children to go to. And by 2027, the council itself predict there will be a deficit of 327 places for students between years 7 and 11, not including sixth form. That's 327 students without a place by the year 2027. Kensington and Chelsea also has a problem. The figures projected stand at 195 students by 2023 to 24. There's also something there that needs fixing, Mr. Davies, again in creating additional secondary school places. And it's a very challenging thing to do. In a constituency like mine, the two boroughs that I represent, finding the sites, land values are incredibly expensive, and we need to recognise some of the difficulty. It's easier said than done in doing that. But nevertheless, the popularity of these schools at secondary level is evidenced by how oversubscribed they are. The West London Free School receives nearly 10 applications for every Year 7 place. At Lady Margaret School, which is a conversion to an academy, it is nearly 7 applicants per place. And these schools continually top parents' lists for first preferences, and all of these outperform others in their area. And it is, of course, great news that the department expects around another 1,000 maintained schools to become academies over the next 2 years. And 110 new schools opening by 2020 will be free schools, and the news in September that 53 new free schools and one university technical college will be creating up to 40,000 new school places. So that is the picture, Mr. Davies. Locally, excellence, popularity of these schools, and drive still from parents to create more of them. We have a deficit in school places, and parents are demanding these kind of innovative schools. But they are concerned, Mr. Davies, and I'll put my cards on the table. They are concerned at what they're hearing from the party opposite in terms of their plans. I was amazed at the speech from the Shadow Secretary of State for Education at the Labour Party conference, Mr. Davies. I doubt if you personally had the misfortune to be there, because I know you're a sensible man. But she said, we'll start by immediately ending the Tories' Academy and Free Schools programme.
From the standing position to which I can't respond, but do continue.
I apologise, Mr. Davies. You are, of course, quite right. But she said, the Shadow Secretary of State for Education, we'll start by immediately ending the Tories' Academy and Free Schools programmes. They neither improve standards nor empower staff or parents. Well, I put it to the opposition spokesman today. I have outlined in 17 minutes a lot of the progress that is being made in my constituency, the popularity and the success of these schools. Parents at those schools currently are alarmed at the Labour Party position and what it might mean, particularly if they have a Labour council as well, which also believes in his policy as well. So I invite him today to put on the record that these parents have got no reason to be afraid, that all of the groups coming to see me now to set up new free schools, incredible diversity of parents and others looking to take advantage of this innovation. And it would be fantastic if we could hear from the opposition spokesman today that their fears are not founded. At that point, Mr. Davies, I will sit down and give others an opportunity to contribute to the debate, but I look forward to hearing the responses from the front bench in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Justin Madders.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I, first of all, thank the honourable member for Chelsea and Fulham for, first of all, securing this debate and for giving us an insight into how schools are improving in his constituency. I think he will find that the experience that we have in Ellesmere Port and Neston is a little bit more mixed. Of course, every area is slightly different, but I think one thing that he did say, which I was very interested to hear, was about the issue of staff turnover in a particular school. I think that is a real challenge to driving up standards, and I would like to certainly hear a little bit more about perhaps afterwards about what was particularly done in that school to keep staff numbers so stable, because there's no doubt that actually the best schools are the ones which can recruit and retain the most impressive staff. First of all, Mr Davis, I must declare an interest. My wife is the Cabinet Member for Children and Young People in Cheshire West and Chester Council, and 2 of my children attend a local school in my constituency. Cheshire West and Chester Council does have an impressive record in education, with over 90% of schools rated good or outstanding, and a plan for every school in the borough to reach that standard. And I think if Cheshire West and Chester Council was a multi-academy trust, ministers would be singing its praises and finding ways to bring struggling schools from around the area under its leadership. Instead, because it is a local authority, the push has been in the opposite direction, with pressure put on governing bodies to convert to academies. And that's, I think, a perfect example of why government policy isn't always about rewarding what works best or bringing people together to improve. It's about an ideological drive towards academies and free schools. And I think it's contrary to what the Honourable Member said. It's actually an experiment which is failing. The flaws with the government's drive towards academisation at all costs are clear to see in my constituency, following the serious decline of one academy over a number of years, to the extent that an entire cohort of young people have effectively been failed by the system. It's not to say there wasn't some excellent teaching at the school, or that we're not incredibly proud of the skills and talents of our young people, but when inspection after inspection raises serious concerns, something needed to be done. If that school had been a local authority school, there is no doubt that there would have been enough for the government to declare the leadership of that school had failed, and the school would need to be converted to an academy. Instead, after years of indecision, the remedy prescribed is more of the same. A decision has been made to rebroker the schools within the trust to new sponsors, and we are hoping for the best from the new sponsors. Parents are understandably anxious to ensure the same situation does not arise again, and I know that the new sponsors are making real efforts to engage with parents. But this process took far too long, Mr Davis, and all the time the council were willing and able to step in and help had they been asked. So I'd like the Minister to explain, if he can, what the rationale is for preventing high-achieving local authorities like Cheshire West and Chester from bringing academies back under their control. Is there a sound evidence basis for this policy? Does it have the support of head teachers and teachers, or is it in reality an ideological decision? And when one considers, as my friend, the member from Stockton, referred to, there are over 100 failing academies out there which are looking for new sponsors, which are responsible for 700,000 children. I have to conclude that ideology is hampering these children's opportunity to get a good education, because there doesn't appear to be a plan B. We've heard a lot about there being no plan Bs in other areas recently, but it appears in terms of failing academies, again, there is no plan B. And if this was just an isolated case, in terms of my school, it would be enough to revisit the approach of government. But a Schools Week investigation found that at least 91 multi-academy trusts had closed or are being in the process of being wound up since 2014. The government hands out grants of between £70,000 and £150,000 for new academy sponsors to set up trusts to cover running costs until the school first opened. So if each of the 91 closed trusts had received just the lowest possible grant, which of course may not have been the case, it may have been more, the government will have paid at least £6.1 million to set them up. And then there are debts the department has to write off when a trust collapses. £3 million in the case of UCAT, a deficit in the region of £8 million at the Schools Company Trust, £500,000 in the case of the Lilac Sky Schools Academy Trust, and £300,000 owed by the Collective Spirit Community Trust. In terms of real terms cuts to local school budget, how can the government justify spending at least £10 million, if not a lot more, on failing multi-academy trusts? And then there's money coming out at the other end, with reports of an academy head receiving an £850,000 payoff. That simply wouldn't be allowed anywhere else in the public sector, so why is it allowed here? And it's simply not a level playing field at the moment. Local schools tell me that they are desperate to expand, but they don't have the opportunity to bid for capital funding to achieve that aim. How can they build on their success if they're not able to build? I'm sure if they were able to reopen as a free school, there would be no problem in getting the cash. But why do they need to reinvent the wheel? Why are existing schools that have put the effort in have made great improvements and are already an established part of the community discriminated against because they are not part of the latest fad from government? How about a policy on capital funding that rewards improvement and looks at where existing provision can be augmented? And has all the money on academies been well spent? Well, take the words of David Laws. He said, what we know is that the most successful part of the academisation programme was the early part of it. Those early academies had absolutely everything thrown at them. They were academised school by school with huge ministerial intervention. The new governors were almost handpicked. They often brought in the best head teachers to replace failing management teams. They had new buildings and sponsors had to put extra cash in. And picking up from the earlier intervention from my honourable friend from the front bench, David Laws also went on to say, our research shows that much of the programme since then has had little impact on standards. Another issue that arises from the mass academisation programme we have seen in recent years is that the local authority has become the admissions authority in name only. And of course the net result of this is that some schools end up being oversubscribed, which exacerbates the chaos we already are getting, because an academy-led system means that we're getting an increasingly lopsided and unstrategic approach with more and more children in my area being taught out of area because of the way schools are able to set their own admission policies now. This has also, I think, led to a rise in the number of children being homeschooled. That figure has risen by more than 40% in the last 3 years, according to figures obtained by the BBC. And that's not just about a broken admission system. It's also about schools perhaps suggesting a particular child could be homeschooled to avoid an exclusion that the school environment may not be the best place for them if they have special educational needs. And yes, of course, some parents are exercising their choice to homeschool, but surely the rising number of academies and the rise in the number of homeschools at least needs to be examined to see whether it is something more than a coincidence. Who is monitoring and evaluating this explosion in homeschooling? Has there been a 40% increase in resources to enable monitoring of homeschooling? Are we confident the legislation and guidance in this area is as up to date as it needs to be? Are we comfortable that so many children are being now educated in this way? Is this a great example of parental choice, or is it where parents are being forced down this route because either the school that they are in or the system has led them to that place? What efforts are being made to enable these children who are being homeschooled to return to school? What scrutiny is taking place of schools or areas that have higher than average levels of homeschooling? Is any analysis done of variations? These aren't easy questions to answer, but I believe that they should be asked. I fear that because we have a fragmented system, once a child becomes home educated, they become somebody else's responsibility. That is the wrong approach. We owe it to all our children to ensure that they get the very best education, no matter where they are. So, in conclusion, Mr Davis, I would like to see the current landscape in education altered so we have accountability, we have transparency, and we have a level playing field. At the moment, I suggest we have none of those things.
Thank you. Mr John Howell.
Thank you very much, Mr Davis, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd also like to thank my right honourable friend for introducing this subject, because it is an area that I have spent quite a considerable amount of my time specialising in within the constituency. And I'd also like to thank the Minister, who has been incredibly courteous to me over the years in meeting with me and in meeting with schools of all sizes to be able to discuss problems. And I do sincerely put my thanks on the record. One of the things that I've been able to do in specialising in this area is to visit every school in my constituency. And that is over 100 schools, I think, from memory, which is quite a lot. Now, I haven't done them all in 1 year. I've done that over a number of years, given that we only have Fridays, and the schools are on holiday for quite a lot of the years. But I have done that, and I have visited all of them. There is one school in particular that I would like to mention, which fits in with the subject of this debate. and that is the Europa School in Culham in my constituency. And before I come on to describe that, can I just re-emphasise the point made by my right honourable friend that what we're offering with these free schools is a considerable amount of flexibility for reflecting a particular way in which parents want their children to be taught. And in this case, I think it offers a particular mindset for how to approach this area, which I think we should all bear in mind. The Europa School is the successor to the European School. Now, I'm not going to get into a Brexit debate. In fact, I was at a naval dinner last night where if anyone mentioned the term Brexit, they had to drink a neat rum in large measures. And while I would love that to be the case here, I suspect that that is not going to occur. But let me just say that the European School had a very distinguished record. It was set up when there were lots of European parents over to work at the Culham Fusion Centre in Oxford University and at the Harwell Science Centre. And for a number of reasons, the funding of the European School dried up. So the Europa School was started as a successor to that school and has gradually taken over the workings of the European School. The Europa School was set up as a free school. And it was set up as a free school because that is what the parents wanted. And they wanted to continue the particular type of education being offered by the European School through the free school. Now, what that education was a way of approaching subjects in original languages. So it wasn't that you went in and you learnt in French, or you learnt in Spanish, or you learnt in German, or you learnt in English. You went in and you were taught in all of these languages, so that you could end up having history in German. You could end up having geography in Spanish, and so on throughout the complete list of subjects that were there. And I think that that is a very valuable way of teaching. Now, the parents wanted that to continue, and that is the system that is being continued in that school. But in order to encapsulate that at the end of the process, they also wanted the children to take the European Baccalaureate. And that offers a very comprehensive system for being able to evaluate people at the roughly the A-level equivalent period that children have to face. Now, I think we need to hold fast on that for what I'm going to say next. Don't forget that this was set up principally initially to deal with the parents of European origin that were in the area. That approach to teaching languages has proved immensely successful. It's proved so successful that we are now in the situation where non-European parents are desperate for their children to be entered into the school, to be taught in that way. And because it's a free school, it is able to offer this way of teaching. Because it's a free school, it is able to say to the parents, we can take your child in. And to be honest, I think it is a superb way of being able to be taught languages. The problem with it comes about because of the European Baccalaureate. And they, as I say, they are desperate to be able to continue to teach that. But there is some difficulty over the ownership of the copyright, if you like, in the European Baccalaureate, and some distinction that is being made as to whether that is in the gift of the European Commission or whether it is something that is in the gift of the Department for Education. And it is an issue that needs to be resolved. And the school, I know, has had some interaction with the Department for Education over this. But it is an important issue because this is a way of teaching that is very special, very special. And people have become not only wedded to this, but have become so attracted to it that it is attracting parents from a wide area. And indeed, earlier in the year, I was able to present a petition from something like 2,500, 3,000 parents and friends of the school in the House of Commons to be able to try to encourage the government to make sure that the European Baccalaureate continue to be taught there. So I think there is something that is very special about free schools, particularly in what they are able to teach and the way in which they're able to teach it, and that this free school illustrates that above all, which is why I have spent the last few minutes telling you about the Europa School, because I think it is a very good example of how free schools work, how they can take the attitudes of parents and make them a reality, and how they can, in this case, through the European Baccalaureate, continue to be able to offer something that is of enormous benefit to the children. And I think the Minister would agree that there is no issue of quality over the European Baccalaureate. It provides just the same quality that that children would have if they were taking traditional A-levels, and for that reason, I fully support the school.
Ms. Alex Cunningham.
It was a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Again, I congratulate the member for Chelsea and Fulham and the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury on securing this important debate. So he must understand the numbers given his role in the past. As I said before, I believe that we should be celebrating the success of all our schools, regardless of where they come from, and even those who aren't doing quite so well. Perhaps we've got something to celebrate there as they strive to deliver for our children. And one school in my constituency who hasn't gone the academy route is the Northfield School at Billingham. And I was delighted to join them when they achieved the Arts Mark just a few weeks ago, and the school band and choir were waiting for me as I arrived, and it was a tremendous pleasure to be there, and they're an extremely successful school. I also talked about the legacy from the Labour government and the fact that I appreciate that the Lib Dem government and the two Conservative governments since have built on the Blair legacy, a legacy that saw funding in schools brought up to realistic levels by more than doubling them during the budgets during that time. And that was the time when we saw the increase in the number of teaching assistants in schools and resources and a capital programme, which I don't think has quite yet been equalled by the current government, but it was a capital programme that was considerable and has made a huge difference to the education of young people in our communities. But of course, there's success, but there's also places where it doesn't actually yet exist. And, you know, we have to have a great emphasis on everybody who is succeeding, but we need an even greater emphasis on those that aren't. Our first two academies within the Stockton Borough was the North Shore Academy and Thornaby Academy, and both of those schools have tended to bump along the bottom. That said, the North Shore Academy is now showing real progress, and I celebrate the fact, although it has relatively low numbers, and so budgets are a major issue, particularly when the government introduced its fair funding programme that saw funding move from schools in the north with considerable special needs to those elsewhere in the country. The Thornaby School is the one that I was referring to earlier when I was talking about support for failing academies, and that bizarre proposal from the Regional Schools Commissioner at one stage to propose a failing academies chain to come in and work alongside them. Well, that school is still waiting for a partner to help improve, but because of its falling numbers, its budgets are extremely limited, and so the school actually struggles considerably. Struggles so much, Mr Davies, that the local authority are actually contemplating subsidising that school and putting resources in there to ensure that it can survive just a little longer. So what we need to know from the Minister is how are we going to get schools like these achieving to the levels that we've been celebrating earlier today. I talked about exclusions a little in one of my interventions, and there was even a television programme on it last night, and I only have second-hand information because, of course, many people were here very, very late last night, but that was talking and was looking at what happens in some of the schools, and schools where children are put into a room, and it's called the ready-to-learn room. So they're excluded, they're taken out of the classroom. And I understand why children need to be removed from classrooms at times, because they're disruptive to others. But those children also need support, the real support. And putting them in a room and isolating them isn't necessarily the idea. One school, or at least one school in the Stockton Borough, they put children into pods. So they're sitting in a little box facing a blank wall where they're supposed to be getting on with work. And yet those children are the ones that possibly, probably are the most likely to be excluded. And when they're excluded, permanently excluded, they end up back in the arms of the local authority. Local authorities that have been stripped of resources and don't really have the ability to support young people the way they would like to. And within the Stockton Borough, one of the greatest pressures on funding, and it's probably the same across the place, is the pressure on high needs funding. Stockton experienced a £2.5 million overspend in this funding in the last financial year, and is projecting a similar overspend in 2018-19. That's because they're having to support the youngsters who are excluded from academies, but also other work as well, and I appreciate that. But they have got to support these children, these other children. And the Council's view is that there's just insufficient high needs funding in the system, and they continue to lobby for increased funding deal, and I'm sure the Minister realises that's what I'm doing to him now. I am actually lobbying him directly for more high needs funding for children in the Stockton Borough, but also across the country. And of course, in the absence of additional funding from central government, the local authority is taking action to try and reduce costs in all sorts of areas to live within the funding envelope available. But it's simply proving more and more difficult every single year. And the Local Schools Forum agreed at its meeting on the 27th of November to submit a request to the Secretary of State to transfer £1.4 million of the schools block to the high needs budget. I hope that's something that the Minister will consider very, very carefully in order to give them the leg up that they need. And that wasn't an easy decision for them to take, because schools are really concerned about the lack of funding in the whole system. And some areas like ours have actually suffered because of some of the fair funding decisions. And of course, the number of pupils going into particular schools. So I'd very much welcome the Minister's view on that, but know specifically what is he going to do about high needs funding in the longer term. Yes, let's celebrate success. And I love celebrating success. I just love going into our schools. The atmosphere is tremendous. There's no doubt that children generally are very happy in school, and happy children actually learn much more quickly than those who are unhappy. So we really need to think in terms of where are the support services. We know about special educational needs. We know certain children need particular support, and yet special needs budgets are being squeezed in these years, and we really need to do more to support them so that they can get the support they need, become the happy children, and also learn as well. So I will continue to celebrate, and I just hope that the Minister will recognise that whilst we have a generally very successful school system in this country, there are many, many children, hundreds of thousands of children, who are still being failed because we don't have the recipe right. We need to get that recipe right as soon as possible. Thank you.
Hayne for the Labour Party.
Thank you, Mr Davis. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship as ever, and can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Chelsea and Fulham for securing this important debate today. A debate with not too many members in it, Mr Chairman. The House sat very late last night with the Brexit deliberations, and I noted the Honourable Member for Chelsea and Fulham went to Dr Chandler's school, I understand, and their motto was ad astra per aspera, which means we look to the stars through difficulties. It might be good advice for the current government, Mr. Davis, as they navigate or steer the ship through the Brexit waters. But I think members on my side will agree that they are steering using celestial navigation on a cloudy night as it currently stands. However, not too many members today because so many were here last night. Now, the reality of the current school system is that it is broken. It's been fragmented beyond repair. The honourable member talked about the member for Surrey Heath when he threw the system up, broke it, see how it would coalesce together. He stated that he wanted to see us go up in the PISA rankings in terms of standards. We know that that hasn't happened because of the reforms. It just hasn't worked at all. And it's in parts unfair, unaccountable, as been already said, in not being led by the needs of local communities in most places. I did a simple Google search on academies and schools today just to see what would come up. And day in, day out, we see some of the problems that the system is faced with. Today, Amanda Spielman, the Chief Inspector of Ofsted, it's a halfway house. It's inadequate. It's not got enough capacity in the system. There isn't enough teachers in the system. There isn't enough leadership in the system. Schools are being left in limbo for far too long, which I'll come on to in just a moment. And in fact, one school in particular has been left in limbo without a sponsor for 7 years. That's the first part of my Google search. I'm happy to give way.
Thanks, Minister, for giving way. So do I take it from what he's saying that he is endorsing his boss's comments that his proposal is to immediately end the Tories Academy and Free School programme? Could he confirm that today?
I will come on to what our programme is. We will see new schools, new academies, but we will bring them in where they are accountable to local people, where proper spatial planning is done, where numbers are consistent with the school places being brought forward. At the moment, there is no accountability, and I'll explain that further in my speech in just a few minutes if he wants to give way then. Or does he want to... Yeah.
Very patient. But can he describe, therefore, in his future policy, these future free schools and academies that will be accountable to local people, how that will differ from existing county schools?
Well, currently we have a system that's unaccountable. The Honourable Member for Henley is having to raise direct pedagogical knowledge and how a school teaches directly with the Minister. We can't run 22,000 schools in England and Wales from Whitehall. I don't think anybody expects that whatsoever. So the system will be local and it will be accountable when Labour comes to power. That's what parents want. We've seen parents cut out of academies and coming off governing bodies across our land. We want parents driving the policies of our local schools with local elected authorities. Secondly, if you do the simple Google search, the Department of Education itself has just recently named and shamed 88 academies and trusts for failing to publish their financial returns. The third thing that came out of my Google search, the academies, this was just today, the academies currently have a £6.1 billion deficit within their system. What is going on, Mr. Chairman, with the accountability and financing of this programme? And finally, one more thing. The Conservatives have been huge at lauding individual schools and some head teachers who've gone down the programme in this instance. But now one of their lauded head teachers, who I won't name here today, in Birmingham, has been banned from teaching indefinitely because of poor standards in the school. So it is broken, it is fragmented. When you have 124 failing schools left stranded outside the system, waiting to be transferred to another chain or sponsor, something is wrong. The member for Ellesmere Port and Neston talked about this very articulately. Indeed, there are authorities there that are willing to participate, but they're being cut out of the system. Authorities with some great expertise, not just Labour authorities, Conservative-controlled authorities. This doesn't chime with what lots of Conservative councillors see should be the policy up and down the country. If it wasn't for the Church of England, the Honourable Member for Chelsea and Fulham talked about faith, if it wasn't for the Church of England who are brokers to so many thousand schools, particularly in our rural areas, because it's different for those of us who represent cities, we have no trouble in the cities finding academy sponsors, but in rural areas and in suburban areas they do. I'm happy to give way.
As I've already said, we've struggled to find a partner for one school in the borough. But I wanted to ask my honourable friend if he would share my invitation to the Minister to come to Stockton, because that is an authority where academies and the local authority actually work very, very closely together, and that can only be to the benefit of pupils.
If the honourable members are asking me to Stockton, I'd be delighted to come to the North East. The reality is that most academies worth their salt actually cooperate with their local authorities or their sub-regional authorities because they want to cooperate. If you look at standards in London, you know, parents didn't send their children to schools in London in the 60s, 70s and 80s because some of the horrendous things that were going on. What changed that? What changed that? Not through market competition, but through cooperation, through the London Challenge, where the Labour government put money into failing schools, bringing the best pedagogy together, the best teachers, and through a cooperative system, raising the standards. So now in London, every 50% of all children, Mr. Chairman, who are on premium pupil premium, get at least 5 good GCSEs. If you draw a line, that's what we did in London. If you draw a line from the Humber Estuary to the Mersey Estuary, through the north of England, through my constituency, our constituency, and our constituency, that number drops to about 34%. So we know what works, and that was being rolled out across the country in 2010, and then austerity put an absolute end to it. And I was just making the point about the Church of England. The honourable member talked about faith, and did we have faith? The substance of things hoped for over the evidence of things seen. And that's certainly government education policy as it currently stands. But I am not of the view that academies are bad, or free schools are bad, or that we need to sweep a broom through the entire system. Labour's reform proposals will not mean a single school closing, won't mean any schools that are currently in the pipeline being cancelled, but for far too long, parents and local communities have been shut out of the decisions affecting the schools in their area. The Minister needs to give power back to communities so that our schools are run by the people who know them best, parents, teachers, and those local communities. Yes, of course.
Giving himself an opportunity to clarify his policy proposal. So it sounds like the schools will carry on, but they will no longer be free schools. They will be wholly under local authority control. Can he confirm that, yes or no?
No, we won't be wholly under local authority control. Local authorities and sub-regional authorities will have a say in our schools. They currently have a say already. Spatial planning, where places are needed. They have a say in that. Where local authorities work best is where they cooperate with schools. That will happen again. Local authorities, though, should be given the power to take on schools where no other sponsor can be found. What is the ideological obsession with not allowing that to happen? I've said 124 unbrokered schools currently containing 700,000 children. This would ensure that no school is left without support of a sponsor to deliver school improvement services and provide it with a network of schools. So can the Minister tell us how many schools are currently awaiting a sponsor? And of those schools, what is the longest time a school has had to wait to get a new sponsor in place? Now, my honourable friend from Ellesmere Port and Neston referred to this, and I did intervene on the member for Chelsea and Fulham. The Education Policy Institute, the former minister in the coalition government, has confirmed yet again there is little difference in the performance of schools in academy change and authorities. There is no evidence for it. The evidence the honourable member cited was that there are just more pupils in our school system. That's what the government have been getting away with, trying to explain that standards have gone up. These standards where schools haven't been inspected over a decade by Ofsted. We also know that Ofsted's only data said that they are measuring affluence and deprivation rather than the quality of teaching and learning. What matters is that schools are able to connect with a group of schools that have high performance, like the London Challenge that I've already mentioned. As there is no evidence that converting a school to an academy will improve outcomes for pupils, will the Minister commit to ending the policy of automatic conversions for schools that receive inadequate Ofsted rating? Because it doesn't happen the other way around. But it's not just the sponsorship that is a challenge for our academies and schools. When 91% of schools are facing real-term cuts to their budget, we cannot allow to go unchallenged a system which permits the education of children to become a vehicle for private profit, allows the rewarding of huge executive salaries, £850,000 payoff in one case, as my honourable friend has said, and see the mounting scandals and evidence of financial mismanagement. One Google search I stated at the beginning of this speech, Mr. Chairman, and we saw evidence of this. We have seen scandal on top of scandal on top of scandal, and yet from the benches opposite, the response has been to do nothing. If the Minister's serious about financial transparency around spending in academies and free schools, will he agree to ban any related party transaction where a profit is being made, regardless of the kind of school involved in that agreement? Furthermore, when will the Minister take much needed and called for action and open an independent investigation into the regulation of academies? Now, sitting alongside concerns about academy chains siphoning off funding for the school system is concern about the actual number of academy schools that are in financial deficit. Currently, the Department of Education data looks at financial status of overall academy trust rather than individual schools within the trust. This means that if an individual school is in deficit, but the trust to which it belongs is in surplus, then the individual school is also deemed to be in surplus. In effect, masking the real number of schools in deficit. Will the Minister provide clarity today on the actual number of academy schools that are in financial deficit? If the Minister doesn't have this figure, will he outline what steps he is taking to ensure the Department have a true understanding of the financial stability of all schools? Can the Minister also outline what the implication of this lack of financial clarity in academy schools has for the implementation of the national funding formula? So, we have academies without sponsors, academies siphoning off funding, academies in financial deficit. Surely there can't be any further problems with our academy and free school system. Unfortunately, there is, Mr. Chairman. We are in the unbelievable situation that in some areas of the country, this government is allowing the oversupply of school places, while in others there is an undersupply. The honourable member for Chelsea and Fulham's much lauded 1 million schools places is, I'm afraid, more smoke and mirrors from this government. Recent local government association analysis of government figures shows that by 2023-24, 71 English councils, that is 52%, may not be able to meet the need for 134,000 secondary school places. The reality is councils... I'm happy to give way to the honourable member.
And he will therefore condemn Hammersmith and Fulham Council was at absolutely bottom of that table in terms of the projected secondary school deficit in places.
Well, councils should have good spatial planning about their school places. I don't have the evidence from that. For the member that comes from, what's the other local authority? Kensington and Chelsea, I think we'll have no lectures on this side of the House about how that council has comported itself over the last year or two. Two major incidents happened in this country last year, Mr Davis. The one was the Grenfell Fire Tower and the other was the Ariana Grande Arena bomb at the Manchester Arena. Look at how those two authorities responded to those two major tragic incidences. One condemned and one praised. The reality is councils are facing an emergency in secondary school places, with the number of pupils growing at a faster rate than the number of places that are becoming available. Yet those best placed to solve this crisis, the councils themselves, have been shut out of the system with no powers to open schools themselves, even though they're having to deal with the fallout. This has resulted in the perverse situation where academy and free schools are opening in areas with little or no demand for places. I remember the school that opened in Bermondsey, £2 million. The council begged it not to build a school there. It attracted 60 pupils over 2 years. We could have sent those children to Eton for half the price, Mr Davis, before it shut. The reality is our current school system is broken, it's being fragmented beyond repair, and in part it's unfair and unaccountable and not being led by the needs of local people. We have exposed in this debate today a system which allows schools to be left in limbo without support, a system which lacks financial transparency and accountability, a system which does not respond or reflect the needs of local communities in most places. Whilst the benches opposite appear to have no plan in place to address these challenges, Labour has a clear vision with a national education service at the heart of that vision. It would create a future system where all schools have a vested interest in the local community and not private corporations.
Minister, Mr Nick Gibb.
Thank you very much, Mr Davies. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. It's come to a point in our careers where I'm now serving under people I entered Parliament with in 1997, such as the seniority which you, Mr Davies, have reached, and by time too. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Chelsea and Fulham, on securing this debate, and for his passion and commitment to ensuring that the pupils in his constituency fulfil their potential through high-quality schools and education. 13 academies and free schools have opened in Chelsea and Fulham since 2010, and I congratulate the teachers, the head teachers, and all the staff in those schools who have dedicated their time to ensuring the success of these new schools, including those who have been involved in establishing the Fulham Boys' School, for which my right honourable friend is a patron. He also talks about a number of particular free schools. The Kensington Aldridge Academy, where the excellent head teacher David Benson has pushed up academic standards in that school and also stewarded that school and its pupils through the tragedy of Grenfell Tower, including a year in temporary accommodation for those pupils and a successful return. And he also mentioned the West London Free School, the head teacher there, Claire Wagner, doing an excellent job with very high academic standards. And we have, of course, watching this debate, Mark Lehane, who was one of the first pioneering head teachers who established Bedford Free School. It has been a hugely successful programme, and my right honourable friend is right to point out its successes. Now, the honourable gentleman, the member for Wythenshawe and Sale, I think does need to be a little bit more rigorous with his research than simply clicking through Google research. For example, school academies' accumulated surpluses amount to something like £4 billion, and excluding fixed assets and pension liabilities, the sector's net assets have increased by £0.2 billion, from some £2.6 billion in 2016 to £2.8 billion in 2017. He also referred to accountability. Of course, the whole essence of the Free Schools and Academies programme is based on evidence from the OECD that shows that high-performing education systems around the world have two things in common: professional autonomy combined with very strong accountability. And we have the strongest accountability system for our academies than we've ever had before. Now, he raised specific issues about related party transactions, and I wanted to address that. We are changing those arrangements, or have changed those arrangements, that from April next year, to ensure that those transactions are transparent and they receive more oversight. Academy Trust will be required to declare all related party transactions to the ESFA in advance and to seek ESFA approval for those that exceed £20,000 either individually or cumulatively. He also said in other debates in the Commons that there have been hundreds or more than 100 closures of free schools. Again, I'm afraid his facts are wrong. As of the 1st of November this year, 13 free schools have closed since the beginning of the programme. In addition to those, 7 UTCs have closed and 21 studio schools have closed since the beginning of the programme. And in total, therefore, that amounts to 41 free schools, UTCs and studio schools closing since the programme, not the number that he cites in the debate. Now, I'm very happy to give way to Member.
Does he not include the collapse of, let's say, just the Wakefield Academic Trust that has 23 schools in it, another trust that collapsed?
Well, those schools haven't closed. Those schools have been rebrokered very successfully to other schools. And the essence of the Free Schools and Academies programme is that we do not allow schools to languish in special measures year after year, which was the essence of what was happening when these schools were in local authority control. We take very swift action where schools underperform, and we will not change the law that requires schools to become academies once they go into special measures, because that's how you get improvement. And I'll come on to some of the examples of how that works in due course. Now, every child, Mr. Davis, in this country, regardless of where they live or their background, should have the opportunity to benefit from the very best education. Free schools and academies have shown that professional autonomy in the hands of able head teachers and teachers can deliver a world-class education. Dixon's Trinity Academy in Bradford, for example, a free school, achieved extraordinary results in 2017 with its first set of GCSEs, placing it amongst the top state schools in England for the progress achieved by its pupils. And strikingly, the progress score for pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds at that school was higher than the progress made for the whole school, including their more affluent peers. This school, I'll give away in one moment, this school and many others shows that socio-economic background should not and need not be a barrier to academic success. And leading multi-academy trusts, often led by inspirational head teachers, demonstrate that excellence need not be restricted to isolated school. And thanks to a forensic approach to curriculum design and the implementation of evidence-based approaches to managing behaviour, the Inspiration Trust, for example, based in Norfolk, and the Harris Federation, based in London, two of the best-performing multi-academy trusts, have conclusively demonstrated that all pupils can achieve, whether they live in coastal Norfolk or inner city London. I give way to the honourable member.
Continue to celebrate this morning the success of our schools, but I still wonder about those that are not quite so successful and the support services that are required for them. Just this last week or so, Ofsted have actually delivered a damning indictment of education with special educational needs. It's described the service as disjointed and inconsistent. The annual report from Amanda Spielman drew attention to the plights of pupils with special educational needs, warning that diagnoses were taking too long, were often inaccurate, and mental health needs were not being supported sufficiently. Surely these are the things that ministers should be attending to, not just celebrating the successes.
Well, we are attending to all these issues. We take, as a government, mental health issues extremely seriously, which is why we published earlier this year the Green Paper on young people's mental health, which is going to transform the quality of mental health support at every level in our school system across the country. And he is right to raise the issue of high needs funding. It's something, again, we take very seriously. There has been an increase in high needs funding from about £5 billion in 2013 to £6 billion this year, but we're also aware of increasing cost pressures on the high needs budget, and we're aware of the causes of that increased pressure on the high needs budget. And we've listened very carefully to his lobbying today and other colleagues who've raised these issues and schools that have raised these issues, and we take those concerns extremely seriously. Now, the whole essence of the Free Schools and Academy programme is to empower teachers and head teachers to promote the importance of innovation and evidence. Power is wrestled away from the old authorities. Ideas are weighed, and if they are found wanting, they can be discarded. There has been a resurgence, a renaissance of intellectual thought and debate about pedagogy, about the curriculum, that used to vest only within the secret garden of the universities. Now it's something that's debated rigorously by thousands of teachers up and down the country. Free schools have challenged the status quo and initiated wider improvement, injecting fresh approaches and drawing in talent and expertise from different groups. There are now 442 open free schools which provide over 250,000 school places when at full capacity. And we're working with groups to establish a further 265 free schools. So the answer to my honourable friend's head teacher, Alan Ebenezer, who runs an excellent school, is that the free school programme is thriving. And there's 265 schools that we are also hoping to open. And thanks to powers granted by the government and the expansion of the Academies and Free Schools programme, teachers and head teachers now enjoy far greater control over the destiny of their school. Decision-making has been truly localised and professionalised. These extraordinary schools are changing what is thought to be possible, and they are raising expectations right across the country, and they are an example to any school seeking to improve. And whether you look at Reach Academy in Feltham, or Dixon's Academy in Bradford, or Harris Academy, Battersea, all with high pupil progress scores, there are some obvious similarities. All of those schools I mentioned teach a stretching knowledge-rich curriculum. Each has a strong approach to behaviour management, so teachers can teach uninterrupted. And all of these schools serve disadvantaged communities, demonstrating that high academic and behavioural standards are not and must not be the preserve of wealthy pupils in independent schools. Indeed, Harris Westminster, a free school that opened in 2014 with close ties to Westminster School and draws pupils from across London, has reported that with 40% of its pupils from a disadvantaged background, 18 pupils went to Oxbridge last year. All around the country, the government has built the foundations of an education system through which teachers and head teachers control the levers over school improvement, and parents exercise choice, shifting decision-making from local education authorities and handing it to local communities and to the teaching profession. With an intelligent accountability system to maintain high standards, innovative schools collaborate and compete with one another to improve teaching, the quality of their curricula, or retention of their staff. 2/3 of academies, Mr Davies, are converter academies, and many of those have become system leaders within multi-academy trusts by helping other schools to improve. Over 550,000 pupils now study in sponsored academies that are rated good or outstanding, and these academies often replaced previously underperforming schools. So when the honourable member says, member for Wythenshawe and Sale, says he wishes to disband or end the autonomy that comes with the Academies and Free Schools programme, he is saying that he would not have enabled 550,000 pupils who were languishing in underperforming schools no longer to be given the opportunity to be taught in much higher performing schools, taking away opportunities, the enemies of promise and social mobility. Mr Davies, as at August 2018, 89% of converter academies were rated good or outstanding by Ofsted. Results in primary sponsored academies continue to improve. The percentage of pupils reaching the expected standard in reading, writing and maths in current sponsored academies was 42% in 2016. In 2018, it was 57%. Academies and free schools are driving up standards all over the country. Queen's Park Junior School in Bournemouth was placed in special measures in May 2011. In the same year, only 50% of pupils achieved level 4 or above in reading, writing and maths, compared to the national average of 67%. In September 2011, Ambitions Academies Trust started working with the school, and in October 2012, Queen's Park Academy became part of Ambitions Academies Trust as a sponsored academy. Queen's Park Academy was judged outstanding in all areas in June 2014 by Ofsted and is now providing support for other schools in the trust. In 2017, the school's writing and maths progress scores in particular were both above average at +0.23 and +0.1.4, and 78% of pupils achieved the expected standard in reading, writing and maths. Wise Academies in the northeast of England has taken on 9 sponsored academies since 2012. And this trust is making the most of its autonomy, the autonomy that the Honourable Gentleman wants to remove, and has reduced teacher workload through efficient lesson planning and sharing resources. They are being innovative in how they teach, embedding maths mastery techniques from Singapore into their maths curriculum. And as a result, every school that has been inspected since joining the trust has been judged either a good or outstanding school. Free schools are amongst the highest performing state-funded schools in the country, with pupils at the end of Key Stage 4 having made more progress on average than pupils in other types of state-funded schools. In 2018, 4 of the top provisional Progress 8 scores for state-funded schools in England were achieved by free schools. William, I'd happily give way to my right honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for his excellent exposition about the success and brilliance of so many of our free schools. I'm not expecting him to make a policy pronouncement today, but would he take on board some of the comments I made in relation to the ESFA and the complaints that I have heard from various parent groups, some successful, some unsuccessful, in setting up free schools, particularly in an area like mine, where the crucial question is always about the site and the ability to secure the site and the, in their view, rather bureaucratic approach that is taken to site selection and delivering the financing for sites.
Yes, my right honourable friend anticipates the point I was going to come to in responding to his comments, but I will do so now. As he knows, the school is currently in, the Fulham Boys School is currently in temporary accommodation, and the department is working hard to ensure that the permanent site will be ready as soon as possible, and all parties are working to deliver the site as early as can be achieved. But it does remain, as he knows, a very complex project. And I'm aware of people's concerns about sites. It is a difficult challenge in finding a site, particularly in London. But we have over 400 free schools that have been established. And with any large project, you will find delays and problems that are encountered in achieving it. But they are achieved. And that's where we have more than 400 very successfully opened free schools. And as I was saying, in 2011, our top 10 provisional 8 scores for state-funded schools in England were achieved by such free schools, by people that persevered through all the problems of finding a site and getting the school opened. For example, William Perkin Church of England High School in Ealing, Dixon's Trinity Academy in Bradford, Eden Girls' School in Coventry, and Tawhid Islam Boys' School in Blackburn are in that top 10 Progress 8 schools in the country. The latter two were opened by Star Academies, who have grown through the free schools programme from running a single school in the northwest to running 24 schools across the country, made up of 9 academies, 15 free schools, and they have approval to open 2 more additional free schools. Of the 10 that have had Ofsted inspections since opening or joining the trust, all have been rated outstanding, all. And that's the kind of programme that the Labour Party wants to stop happening in the future, denying people, young people, the opportunity of having an excellent education. Because this approach is working. The Free Schools and Academies programme, it demonstrates, as I've just cited, the benefits of strong trust and strong collaboration. Now, converting to an academy, Mr. Davies, is a positive choice made by hundreds of schools every year to give highly able teachers the power to make their own decisions, the breathing room to be creative and innovative, and the freedom to drive improvements based on what they know works for their pupil. And one such example, cited by my honourable friend, the member for Henley, was the Europa School, is the Europa School, that converted from being an independent European school into becoming a free school. We were very pleased to authorise that new free school to teach the European Baccalaureate rather than A-levels and GCSE. But wary, Mr. Davies, of the risk of being made to drink a shot of rum, the future of that qualification will depend on discussions with the European school system post-Brexit. We want to go further, Mr. Davies, to make sure that no one is left behind. We want to extend the Free Schools programme to areas of the country that have not previously benefited from them. And on that point, I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Particularly on that particular point about extending it into other areas. My impression is that the vast majority of free schools tend to be open in the more leafy areas, areas of less deprivation. I wonder what evidence he has, and perhaps he could write to me about the number of schools, free schools opened within areas of high deprivation and how they're actually achieving great things.
Well, 50% of open free schools have been opened in the bottom 30% in terms of the areas of deprivation. So there has been a determination to ensure that free schools are opened in areas of disadvantage, in areas that have been poorly served by the school system in the past. And I'd be very happy to respond to his earlier invitation to come to schools in his constituency to see firsthand how they are using the autonomy and freedoms that come with this programme to raise standards. Mr Davis, earlier this year we launched the 13th wave of free schools, targeting areas of the country with the lowest standards and the lowest capacity to improve. And these are the places where opening a free school can have the greatest impact in improving standards. And the application window for Wave 13 closed on the 5th of November. We received 124 applications, both new providers and experienced multi-academy trusts, and we are assessing these proposals and will announce successful applications in the spring. And we will launch the 14th wave of free schools shortly, demonstrating again to Mr Ebenezer and others that the free school programme continues to thrive, albeit with one threat on the horizon, which is that the Labour Party is committed to ending this programme. Mr Davis, this summer we launched a special and alternative provision free school wave. By the deadline in October, we received 65 bids from local authorities, setting out their case for why a new special or AP free school would benefit their area. And in the new year, we will launch a competition to select trusts in the areas with the strongest case for a new school. And we also continue to accept proposals for maths schools from some of our best universities, having already seen the excellent results reported by both existing maths schools, Exeter Maths School and King's College, London Mathematics School, which have exemplary A-level results in maths and physics and further maths. Mr Davis, I'm very grateful for the support of my right honourable friend that he has given to this issue today and to free school programme in particular. Some important points have been raised, and I've welcomed this opportunity to discuss a central part of our education policy and to share some examples of the excellent work in academies and free schools throughout the country. Our education reform programme since 2010 has brought new levels of autonomy and freedom for schools with clearer and stronger accountability. There are many examples of academies and the multi-academy trust model bringing about rapid and effective improvement in previously underperforming schools. Since 2010, we have been unflinching in our determination to drive up academic standards in all our schools, to drive out underperformance in our school system. Our ambition is for every local school to be a good school, to close the attainment gap between pupils from different backgrounds, and to ensure that every pupil, regardless of their background or where they live, is able to fulfil their potential.
Thank you. May I invite Greg Hans to wind up briefly?
Yes, thank you, Mr Davies. And I will try and fill the remaining 8.5 minutes. Don't need to. Well, that's helpful advice. It's been a little while since I've done one of these debates, but as the time is available, I might say a few things. But I think it's been an excellent debate, Mr Davies, and I think I'm delighted to see the academy and free school programmes thriving and making the degree of difference to school standards across the country. As the shadow spokesman pointed out, I have the pleasure and, to some extent, the privilege of going to one of the best state schools in the country, Dr. Challoner's Grammar School in Amersham, which I think stood me in good stead, Mr Davies, for everything else that came after. And I've always been a strong believer in high-quality state education, and that is what I think this government has delivered over the last 8.5 years and will continue to deliver. And as I said, I think the very centre of this movement is my constituency and the two boroughs of which my constituency forms part of, Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea. 13 new free schools and academies, 5 it's an incredible achievement to actually open 5 new secondary schools in the 2 smallest boroughs in London, 8 additional primary schools as well. And often these things are very, very difficult. I remember when the West London Free School opened, which must have been, I think, the very first, or almost the very first free school in 2011 or 2012. I remember speaking with the then leader of the council, the excellent Stephen Greenhalgh, and also with the then Secretary of State, the member for Surrey Heath, and with the founder of the school, and talking about how we were going to make this possible. And it was quite hard. There's the number of obstacles that people setting up these schools have to face, and most of them are incredibly dedicated in seeing that delivered. So the sites can be very, very difficult, and that is something where I take a very strong interest in how the ESFA works and how these things might be improved. And I welcome the commitment from my right honourable friend to have a look at and a continuing review of how that is done. We have a crisis in our schools coming up locally, despite all these achievements. I mentioned the shortage of places in Hammersmith and Fulham. The current Labour Council, Mr Davies, has sat on its hands for the last 4.5 years in doing anything about this. After all of the achievements in the preceding 4 years of the Conservative government combined with that Conservative council in delivering all of these new schools, nothing has been delivered in the last 4 years. They will be short by 327 places. Reform has come to a shuddering halt. But they'll also be alarmed by what has been said by the party opposite, the shadow spokesman. He failed to repudiate what the shadow Secretary of State said at Labour Party conference, where she said we'll start by immediately ending the Tories' Academy and Free Schools programme. I think he said, if I understood him correctly, that it wouldn't mean the closure of these schools, but they would be taken immediately back into, or for the first time ever, under local authority control. That would be the abolition of free schools and academies in the way that they are currently operating, ending their autonomy. That will strike alarm bells in my constituency, Mr Davies, by so many parents who are currently at those schools, plus all of the parent groups who are coming to see me to talk about establishing new schools and the incredible diversity in education that we've seen in my constituency. We've had amazing bilingual Anglo-French schools set up, feeders into the incredible Lycée Charles de Gaulle. And these new parent groups wanting to set up bilingual Spanish schools, all of these groups, I'm expecting at some point that they will come to me and say, we are alarmed, Mr Hands, at what we are hearing as the policy of the party opposite, threatening the future of these schools before they have even been established. And I would really invite the leading opposition party to review and reconsider its policy, because that policy will be incredibly unpopular and is incredibly unpopular in my parts of London. Some of these schools, Mr Davies, have got an incredible record. And actually, in terms of things like when you look at where they have their intake from, incredibly diverse intake. Fulham Boys School, for example, is very proud of the fact that they simultaneously have 40% of their children qualifying for pupil premium, whilst 15% also come from a private school background before they came to the school. And actually combining in a community like mine, where there's not much in the middle, but they take the full spectrum of pupils. Arc, Burlington Danes and Shepherd's Bush, for example, nearly half are eligible for free school meals. And these are quite often intakes from the more deprived parts of the two boroughs in the north of the borough, and most of the schools do a fantastic and brilliant job. And it'd be a great shame to see that future threatened by a future government. But, Mr Davies, there is, in of course, all of this, as we all know, that there isn't going to be a future Labour government coming up. So I can say to them, they can at least rest assured on that front. But nevertheless, it is a cause of concern in my constituency, and I hope that the shadow team reconsider their ideological approach to ending this programme and reconsider in the best interest of those parents and pupils at those schools and in future schools to come.
The question is that this House has considered the future of free schools and academies in England. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of many the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you.
David Amos is here. So.